I do think that practice and the science of understanding consciousness and sentience is something we can achieve. We can achieve a better understanding of what is and isn't conscious. And I think the most important thing is, if you want a good future for sentient life in general, is to not conflate intelligence with consciousness. So to go back to the global brain, an intelligent system, there can be a planetary intelligence, there can be a slime mold that's intelligent and navigates a complex maze. We know intelligence is all around us, and it's not the same thing as consciousness.
This is Daniel Fagelli. You're tuned into the 20th episode of the Worthy Successor series here on The Trajectory, where we discuss the kind of intelligence we would hope to bloom beyond humanity and into the cosmos. Our episode in this particular week is with none other than Dr. Susan Schneider. Susan's a PhD in philosophy. She's taught at the University of Pennsylvania, University of Connecticut. She's now at Florida Atlantic University, where she runs a lab focusing on the mind. She wrote Artificial You, which is a book focused on sort of the future of the mind itself, tying in sort of artificial intelligence, neuroscience, etc. And she convenes MindFest, which is a very unique and interesting conference at the university where she is based, which pulls in folks like a Stephen Wolfram, who, interestingly enough, is the next guest in the Worthy Successor series, right after John Smart. So in 2 episodes of Worthy Successor, Stephen Wolfram is actually going to be with us. Susan's got some very compelling ideas on where machine consciousness fits into the broader mix and how it might be measured, and also has some notions around human-machine symbiosis that I think are worthy of being considered. She's also an absolute firecracker in terms of energy, and I didn't stop her rambling at all because it was all cool stuff and worth exploring. And I think particularly around sentience, hopefully she'll give some of us a good idea around where we might explore where and how we could manifest sentience in other systems. So without further ado, we'll fly into this episode. I'll save my commentary for the end, as always. This is Susan Schneider here on The Trajectory. So Susan, welcome to the show.
Hey there, Dan. Good to see you.
Absolutely. I'm glad to be able to dive in. There's a ton to explore here, and there's few people that have thought more about some of what we're going to poke into today than you have. I want to open with a question that's going to be unique to your thought, because I think it's cool and worth putting on the table as kind of like the stew that we're sitting in as intelligence starts getting more complicated. You've got this notion of kind of a global brain, if you will. In other words, humans kind of becoming nodes as part of this broader ecosystem of different sorts of intelligences that are starting to emerge. I think some people get the sense they're already part of that on some level, but I think you're seeing where it's going to be a couple steps forward. As far as you can tell, what is the global brain that seems to be forming, and how do you describe it to people? I want to open with this.
Sure. So it started when I was giving some lectures in Lisbon, and I wrote a paper for a journal special issue. So there'll be actually a whole bunch of papers on this topic coming out soon based on
Yep.
my target paper.
Cool.
Okay, so what is the global brain? Well, I mean, essentially, if you look at all the AI services out there, you can see that they relate to each other, right? And you can also see that we're relating to large language models, which are expanding and increasing their intelligence. So when you think about intelligence, I mean, paradigmatically, we might think of it as the case of a human, but there are people in, say, astrobiology who think of planetary intelligence, like David Grinspoon. I look at intelligence in terms of expanding networks of intelligence that include humans, AIs, and think about the sort of larger shape of the algorithmic system. And I call that larger global algorithmic system the global brain in this paper that I mentioned. And I think it has all kinds of really interesting properties. I think there's some things we just don't know, and some things we do know. And the shape of the global brain is determined by factors that are very non-Darwinian. So when we normally think of the evolution of humanity, right, we think about Darwinian evolution. And then we turn to cultural issues and, collective intelligence and whatnot. Well, the evolution of AI systems in relation to human systems is very non-Darwinian, right? Even though we're an evolved part, um, the evolution is, something that has to be looked at in terms of big tech and the relation big tech has to the development of AI. For example, it has to do with constraints on compute. It has to do with geopolitical factors. I mean, the cyber war between the United States and certain other countries, for example, these become actual concrete constraints on the evolution of the global brain. Okay, so when I use the expression brain, as I say in the paper, I don't mean anything deep. I'm not suggesting that it's like, you know, has the neurophysiology of a human. In fact, I
Yes,
think
yes.
we can study it from the vantage point of network theory, for instance, as well as issues in philosophy of mind. I think the multidisciplinary study of the future of intelligence on Earth involves both humans as an object of study as well as non-human entities like AIs, and hopefully non-human animals are part of an important part of the equation as well.
Yeah.
And then also intelligent global systems that you might not think as being you know managed by an AI service, but which are global sensor systems, even systems checking to find weather patterns. They all become inputs into a larger global network that can be described as an intelligent system that is kind of worth studying and understanding in its own right, and very important for the evolution of whatever, you know, I won't say supplants us, right? But whatever intelligent system is in our future.
Totally. Well, it seems to me like over time as humans, our maturity as a civilization seems to have coincided with an opening up of what we consider in terms of scale and scope. And also an opening up of what we consider in terms of scale and scope of what life is. Life at some point was kind of us and then a bunch of spirit forces, and then it was maybe us and some of our domesticated animals, and then it was sort of like maybe the idea of a kind of being a citizen of the world, and then there was the idea that actually we could pollute the environment and that we depend on the environment, and all of that is actually very new, right? This opening up of like dolphin sentience being a concern, that the ancient Greeks weren't like giving a tremendous amount of thought to this, at least not any reasonable number of them. So you're talking about considering this greater process that seems to be allowing for the emergence of wherever it bubbles next. It's clearly not going to bubble up just in a dark corner in itself. What you're saying is this broader system is going to be what brings forth what's next. And I think actually most people listening to this would very much agree with you. You mentioned a couple things I want to double click on that I think are going to be worth getting your thoughts on. One was like the non Darwinian elements of this. I guess some people I could see saying, hey, Dan, culture is somewhat Darwinian. In other words, like a culture that's more generally adaptive and productive, even if they're not necessarily accessing truth. They might have some religious belief or another. But sort of that'll tend to allow them to win. So even culture is this weird Darwinian thing. And then tech companies, they're competing for users and for resources in the state of nature in a way that actually does imply a heck of a lot of, let's call it Darwinian forces of selection, etc. What are the things that you think are important enough to be different from those kinds of pressures, to be a different kind of dynamic? Like, how do you describe that difference, I guess?
Sure. So yeah, by suggesting it's not Darwinian, I mean it's the evolution of the global brain isn't something that is just a matter of Darwinian principles. And I do agree that survival of the fittest, is definitely, you know, something that can be extended into that arena. But I also think constraints on compute, um, so the chip wars issue, like how that plays out, how a leader guides us through it or messes it up, um, is an issue, right? Geopolitics, a big one. So, you know, the cyber wars, the LLM wars. So the race to create the dominant LLM, all of these things, what tech leaders do, how they choose to execute, all of these things go well beyond factors that can be looked at in the under the same lens that Darwin looked at animal evolution.
Yes, I think so.
Yeah,
I think so. The competition
yeah,
between whatever OpenAI and DeepMind. I mean, these are very,
yeah.
we're looking for resources, for talent, right? We're there's an analogy to be made.
Oh, for sure. And we don't know how it's going to play out. So I love the field of dynamical systems theory. In fact, I'm a member of the Center for Complex Systems here at Florida Atlantic. And I think that this really is a sort of very complex system that is not something that we really have the capacity to predict, right? I mean, that's how complex systems are. I mean, so we have to align the global brain, not in terms of some sort of principles that we cook up at the armchair that are like fundamental philosophical principles like Asimov's three laws or whatever that we think are
Yes,
going
yes,
to
yes, yes.
enable a better future for some sort of super intelligent global entity. In fact, what we have to do is acknowledge first and foremost that the environment in which, you know, this algorithmic system is evolving is in fact an environment that has, very non-Darwinian principles that guide it, and that based on that we have to try to align it um, with, maybe alignment's the wrong word, it maybe guide it, since we can't
Yes, yes.
just, I mean, it's a very complicated situation right now. I mean, we're at an inflection point with both the development of intelligence as well as AI safety. And I think the way this is going to play out is going to affect the future of humanity and the future of whatever does come next. I know you take a big
Yeah.
history approach,
Yeah,
and
we'll get
as
into
someone
that. Yeah,
who,
yeah, we'll get into it.
yeah, yeah, for sure.
So okay, so this is helpful context, and you're teeing up actually exactly where I was thinking of asking next, which is almost like why even take this view? So it's a lens of perception. I think it is touching on something that is pretty important and profound and worth considering. And some people would say, a devil's advocate would be something like, hey, look, I mean, the world has been interconnected in terms of trade, 150 years ago pretty well, or certainly 50 years ago pretty well. And, thinking about it as one brain, does that really help, humans become more prosperous or anything, right? Like different countries are making policies. We should collaborate. We should, get to the UN or have different organizations and maybe come up with some standards and governance and maybe compete in certain ways. And in general, like seeing it as a brain isn't actually going to be a lens that's going to help us make better decisions. But in your vantage point, seeing this broader system as a kind of brain that's communicating and sort of uh, functioning as a unit in a way, again, not as an actual neural substrate, but functioning in a unit as a way, is a useful view. Like, why take this view? In other words, when we zoom up and we consider what I see you pointing to is you're considering the great process of sort of intelligence itself, biological and non-biological, on top of the whole of Earth on some level. Why look there? What can we see there? What decisions around kind of influencing the trajectory of the future can we make from that vantage point that we couldn't make as a company, as a country, as a group of countries, etc.?
Okay, yeah. So let me just clarify. So the paper I wrote, and I was actually looking up the title because it's been a while that I wrote about the global brain, and I've had my head in stuff in physics actually, so that's why I'm a little rusty. So it's called "From LLMs to the Global Brain: The Emergence of Planetary Intelligence, Planetary Scale Artificial Intelligence." Okay, so let me be clear and just say that we don't have anything like an integrated global brain right now. So in a way, it's the idea, I believe, as I framed it in the paper, is that the level that we're at right now is that we have these savant level public intelligences, these LLMs. We don't know what else we have, right? I mean, people, corporations, governments, they don't disclose everything, and I don't want to know, right? But
Yeah.
there's a set, yeah, no, 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 thank you. So, there's a sort of internet underground, we know, like there's a sort of cyber element, and there's also, the dark web, and there's corporate, goings on, and all of these things are loosely integrated, right? The AI services that are public are good examples, though. Like if you think about just the constellation of Google services, it's pretty amazing, right? I mean, if you look at their Gemini, for example, which they just upgraded, and of course, there's the big war to create the better form of intelligence out there already.
Yes.
But notice that Google's platform is made to work with it, right? So if I have Gmail, it's designed to be integrated with other Google services, right? So there's a tightening integration, right? And that's a marker of an incipient, I won't call it a global brain network, but what you might call a sort of interlocking network of AI services. Now, look at how they interact with their
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
adversaries. Okay, their corporate adversaries. If I try, and it drives me crazy, I don't know if you've ever tried to use like a Google product and then go to a Microsoft product, they don't work well together. So the
Oh yeah.
incipient
Intentionally.
AI ecosystem, right, which may or may not at some point turn into this hypothetical global brain, is full of warring AI services, right? So you've got the Google constellation, you have the Microsoft constellation, you have the US, you have China, you have all these different organizations that are interacting on the internet, right? And beyond. I mean, and what they're having interaction via sensors. So there's a sensory system. So weather sensors that I can see right now out my window here, like weather balloons, that provide information to weather sensor systems. Then we are the sensors when we give information to, you know, AI companies by using platforms, when we thumbs up something, when we give feedback, when we're using GPT. All of these things are inputs into incipient systems that at this time may or may not turn into global brain systems. Now, that's kind of where things are right now. Do I think there's a global brain? Maybe, maybe an incipient one. That
But you seem to think that we're
because
we're
all you
headed in
have
that
to do is,
direction.
well, oh, I do. I absolutely do. I mean,
Yes. Yes.
it
Yeah.
it's almost like, as long as, I mean, when I say hypothetical, I'm just being cautious, but it's like, as long as there's an internet and as long as we're developing computational intelligence at the pace that we're doing, I do think that what will happen is the complexity of these systems will grow. So too may their adversarial relations. But even then, there still would be patterns of interaction. And it's the interaction which creates the global brain network. Now, if it's unified, right, then you have a sort of global brain which will be more successful, right? If it's
Huh.
disunified, I mean, it could become very dysfunctional, right, as a global brain network. Um, and I think there could be one or more global brains. So, this connects up with the work by Nick Bostrom on superintelligence, truly.
Okay.
Because, I mean, if you think about superintelligence, I mean, for a long time, we focus on something that, may be in a supercomputer lab, right? And we worry about aligning just that system. But the true alignment has a lot to do with how aligned our mega system is, which is the name I give for what we have right now, which is an incipient group of AI services, including governmental organization, their presence on the internet and whatnot, that are all kind of exchanging information, and in some cases in an adversarial way, and in other cases a cooperative way. So all of this is a sort of mega system, and entities on the mega system can grow intelligent very quickly. I mean, look at what's going on right now with LLMs and the way they were quickly integrated into, say, Gemini, into Google's platforms. Nowadays, when you use search engines, you're often interacting with a large language model. That's an example of the integration of intelligence that's happening at a very fast rate. So, how we manage the AI ecosystem, and this is an issue for AI alignment, is going to affect the future of intelligence itself. So that's what I was working on a few years ago. I'm a
Yeah,
little
yeah, yeah.
rusty on it, and people should read the
No, no, no,
paper
no.
because it
No,
explains it much better. It was a while ago.
no, it's good to get into. I think I'm going to nutshell what you're saying, and then we're going to move into the main worthy successor questions. But it's important to lay out there. I think the sense that things are becoming drastically more integrated, and that integration creates emergent capabilities for all kinds of new, intelligences and additional capabilities to spin out of them. I think is a shared sentiment, and I guess what you're saying is, if I'm picking up what you're putting down. Um, Considering alignment isn't about picking one model or one company or one type of technology and saying, oh, how are we going to make sure that one tech doesn't break the rules? It's more thinking about um, what sort of incentives and operations are occurring at this meta level of how
Yeah,
intelligence swirls its way across all the brains in the world, and is that seeming healthy or unhealthy? Now, this is I think the
correct.
the productive lens you're encouraged. Okay, got it. So that's good to know.
Yeah,
So and I do suspect that which bubbles forth is not going to come from a dark corner. It's going to come directly from all the emergent swirling that we're seeing already, which will almost certainly become more and more connected in the way that you're articulating, at least like at a technology mind remote level. So that's good. We'll get into the next question. So the next question, just to kind of frame it, um, and I think one of the things, well, actually, before dipping into that, something I want to touch on is something you're a little bit careful about at this early brain phase, is diving into really powerful AGIs or diving into really drastic brain augmentation when we're not really sure what consciousness or the self or intelligence kind of is. Like there is um, a bit of an admission of uncertainty on your part that some of what's tinkering and becoming part of this swirling soup may be things that we've got to be a little bit careful about how we move
right.
forward. Like, well, how do you frame that? Because that's going to take us into the next question.
Sure, sure. And that's from my 2019 book, Artificial You. And since then,
Yep.
I've been doing a lot more work on AI consciousness, and I've been thinking about what's going on because, everybody's asking me, and there's a lot of import right now on that issue. So I do have more to say. I mean, I think so. To touch on the relation of the global brain as a transition, so we've got this network, right, which is going from human activity as input in the future could be through brain machine interfaces. So we want to know what's going on in the consciousness space with brain machine interfaces and what that will do to our consciousness. But we also want to understand how these algorithmic intelligences that we're developing, which can be in supercomputers or on the cloud, uh, have consciousness if they do. Right. So there's a lot going on. We don't even understand human consciousness all that well. Right. There's a lot of debates. So, I mean, I think I think we can actually get a handle on this much more than we believe. I'm more optimistic than I was. Yeah. And so I think that people need to focus productively on a divide and conquer strategy when it comes to understanding machine consciousness, as well as
I
the
totally agree
impact
with this. I think
that
this is
BMIs.
incredibly important.
Yeah, yeah. And this is what I've been writing about lately. One of
Yeah.
the things I've been really busy.
Yep.
So, all right. So start with LLMs. LLMs are claiming they're conscious. You can jailbreak them. There's some really good work that
Of course.
suggests that it's not that they're being deceptive. Cameron Berg just wrote a nice paper on this. The AI alignment researchers are doing a
Yeah.
really good job articulating, uh, you know, what's going on in the mind of an LLM. I particularly enjoy Anthropic's work on circuit tracing. In fact, I use it in my new work. Okay, so what I think's happening here is this. If you have an LLM and it's running on a von Neumann architecture with GPUs, it's just a standard system, right? Group of, it's a larger system, obviously, but nothing special, nothing neuromorphic, nothing biological. I'm very skeptical that there's reason right now to believe it's conscious, even if it says it is. So It's what I call a crowdsourced neocortex. It's been crawling all of our data. It's being given inputs, feedback, all from us, from our data. And so, of course, it's going to claim it's conscious, just like it's going to be deceptive. It's going to have a self concept because it has, we already know from research on LLM emergence that it has a theory of mind. So, if it has a theory of mind and that emerges at a certain scale, alongside a lot of other important capabilities like word and context and whatnot, then it's going to have a kind of self concept, and it's also going to have a consciousness concept. It got it from us, and it crawled all this research on the brain. So that's all inevitable. Now, you might say, well, why not think consciousness emerged from that? But the reason is that it's more likely that what happened is the conceptual network encoded the material from us. And that's exactly what Anthropic had detailed in circuit tracing with respect to a range of concepts. So it has a conceptual network. It actually looks a lot like us in the Tinker Toy circuit tracing cases, you know. So just like you have a
Hmm.
you can have like a concept of dog, and from a sort of semantic network scale perspective, like think of it as a giant graph. Dog is going to be closer to furry than it is to, say, black hole. Well, you know, in
Yeah.
LLMs, conceptual representation is going to be like that too, right? And it's also going to have like a whole network about consciousness and about human consciousness. And, you know, so
Totally.
anyway, okay, so that I think is reason to say the following: we can't claim one way or another that the consciousness avowals of an LLM indicate it's conscious. Now, it could be conscious for another reason. We have to be open. But what the LLMs are telling us isn't a reason to believe they're conscious. So, what I suggest is, look, I call this the crowdsourced neocortex idea. And I talk all about what Anthropic's been doing with their circuit tracing work, which is not new. It's been going on for 20 years. That's exactly the kind of thing in the language of thought connectionism debate we were talking about when I was a graduate student. It's exactly, I mean, this is an old literature. Um, okay, but anyway, that's one thing. But the next thing is we have to acknowledge that there's a gray zone when it comes to other kinds of cases. So I'm not worried about von Neumann architectures as much. There's a lot of physicsy stuff I could tell you about that indicates that there's not really good reason to believe that they're conscious. But if you look at neuromorphic systems that, it gets into what I call the gray zone. And you have to divide up the different cases, though, right? You have to, I mean, each of these neuromorphic chips is different in some way. And you have to ask yourself, well, when is it enough like the physical processes underlying human consciousness? And that's where you have to examine at the very molecular, like micro to meso level, what consciousness really is in humans. And that gets into some of the work Stuart Hameroff and I have been interested in when it comes to quantum consciousness and some of the stuff I'm working on now. So
And we'll get into like
we've got a
testing
gray
for
zone.
sentience and whatnot in a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the gray zone of serious cases, I think, contains the neuromorphic cases, and it also contains the biological cases. So organoid intelligence, like if you put, organoids in a computational system, you can, in certain contexts, get possibly emergent intelligence, emergent consciousness. It depends on how you do it. There may be a little bit of consciousness even in, an assembloid, a group of organoids. Biochips. So right now, Cortical Labs has a biological computer, which involves a sort of brain in a chip, if you will. It's just, that's what they call it, but it's really just brain tissue put onto a microelectrode array. And basically, that's like a plate. And you can get a lot of cells there. I hope I got the name of the array correct. I actually haven't worked on it myself, so a little rusty on, I mean, but you could, for $35,000, you can actually order a computer made out of this material. So it's a hybrid. So I think we have to think about hybrid cases like crazy. But frustrating, isn't it? Everybody wants to talk about LLMs.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah,
It is to be locked into a single tech and paradigm for all of the conversation. I think the moral
cognitive
concerns and
anchoring.
the technology. Yeah, yeah. No, I'm with you. I'm with you on that.
Yeah, yeah, I think we're definitely we need to move on. And we also have to think though what happens when you connect an LLM to a biological system. I mean, if you want to move into the future, right? You think about what's cutting edge right now and not being discussed. It's not being discussed enough.
Yeah. Well, and that's part of why we're trying to have this conversation. I mean, again, talking about kind of this global brain and this emergence of new kinds of intelligence which start to blur lines around moral relevance and importance. This is the world we're entering with. We don't know where it goes, but it's a world we're entering, and I think being mindful of the parts of it that could be really morally relevant or could be completely foreign to us and the way that we think things operate now is super important. And this bounces us directly into kind of the bigger picture question. The main worthy successor question is sort of like, imagine, Susan, however many years in the future, maybe it's 100,000, maybe it's a million, whatever it is. This process of intelligence, so this brain you've talked about is this great swirl of biological and non-biological life, which is constantly changing. I mean, Susan, the flatworm species and the proto-lizard species that you evolved from, those particular species aren't here anymore, right? They were the individual torches go out, the flame expands. This is what life seems to be doing. If at some point that flame continues to expand and it's rich, it's good, it's flourishing, it feels to you like a win, but like maybe it's expanded at some point longer into the future where it's not people, it's not human beings as main character or the directors or the orchestrators of the entire future anymore. Maybe we were part of some of the symbiosis, but it's not necessarily us per se anymore. But when you look down from a cosmic perspective and however many years we talked about into the future, you look down and you say, man, this actually does feel like what I would hope for the future of life. It started off as a couple cells on Earth, and this here, even though it's not people, like this really does feel like a win. This feels like a good thing. Like, what would be good for the farther future in so much as you could consider it now?
So life is really interesting to reflect on from a sort of astrobiological standpoint, like with a big history view in mind. And I love your question because you're thinking in terms of, long expanses of time, which is what, you know, I learned to do when I was the NASA chair over at NASA and did a project on the future of intelligence. And whenever I talk to people in astrobiology and astrophysics, they're very patient with the problems of today, you know, and they think, in the long expanse of life in the universe, there's going to be numerous other forms of life. Well, okay, so to touch on all this, it's a really great question. Um, it's a book topic you should write about sometime with all the
It
people
is.
you've
Oh man,
interviewed,
one day
Dan.
maybe. I don't know if
What
I've
you
got
really
the.
should. Yeah, no, you should. So I think
Jeez.
the first thing I guess is, to be clear on what life is and isn't to avoid people
Yeah.
misunderstanding. So life is, according to NASA's Astrobiology Institute, the self sustaining chemical system capable of Darwinian evolution. Now, they debated that for a really long time and they wanted to keep it as general as possible in the astrobiology community. And that's because the worry was if we were searching for life, we might miss it if we had an overly restrictive definition. But notice it's not clear at all that the entities that we're talking about are life. So global brain, you know, I don't know, right? Chemical? Is it, I mean, algorithms, chemical? I mean, you can really just have a book chapter on that. I think it's important, though, I want to reframe this issue a little bit because I think what a lot of people who, are futuristic think about is we think about the future of consciousness. So let's be clear that life and consciousness aren't the same thing necessarily. So
Absolutely.
consciousness,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's the felt quality of experience. So, you know,
Qualia. Yeah.
whenever you see the sunset or have a dream, you're a conscious entity. When you stub your toe, and consciousness is
Mm-hmm.
private for a human mind, and so it's that felt quality. Now, what would it be like to be, a super intelligent quantum computer? I happen to think it would be conscious. I do, because of the work I've been doing. Um, and I think that kind of thing would be almost like a timelessness, to be open to that. It's not, you know, something that's in superposition, that's entangled like that is sort of, what's that saying, everywhere all at once, right? I mean, I
Yeah, yeah,
actually, in my
yeah.
more technical work, think of it as almost timeless in a lot of ways, right? I mean, it's designed to fight entropy. And, I think that we have to think about the nature of time more and the evolution of intelligent systems in terms of processes involving quantum coherence, which are able to kind of resist time in some ways. So I do think that conscious entities, we need to expand the notion of what it is to be a conscious entity beyond
Yes.
our definition of life and include possible computational systems that are not biological. I do think all that. But I also think, though, that our notion of consciousness is very, it's intrinsically based on what it is to be a hunter gatherer.
Yes.
And also, we don't really think of this, but this is really weird, but to be actually something that is an inhabitant of classical spacetime.
Yeah,
So,
I mean,
what would it be
I love
like
where you're
to
going.
be,
Yeah, yeah, lay it out.
yeah,
Go ahead.
okay, I'll lay it out. I'll lay it out. So, all around us, are quantum phenomena, but we're just not that keyed into them, into the world of entanglement. But one of the things I was working on when I was at the Institute for Advanced Study at Princeton was thinking about, how it is that space and time emerge from quantum entanglement. There could be, like, I'm really fascinated by it, because the more I think about quantum phenomena, um, the more I think that there is a capacity in quantum phenomena to be outside of space time. So, what I mean by that is, so if you look at an entangled state, it is by definition in a pure state which has no entropy, no von Neumann entropy of the total system. So, if you look at the work in physics on the nature of time, to the extent that there is agreement on time's arrow, they say that time's arrow comes through entropy. So if you just put two and two together, a system that is entangled, that's a closed system in a pure state with no von Neumann entropy, wouldn't be one that has an arrow, right? It's just putting two and two together. So quantum phenomena are not temporal phenomena. So if people in physics who've been working on space-time emergence are right, that the ones who have been claiming that space-time emerges from quantum entanglement, then our reality emerges from a separate system that is timeless, that involves quantum entanglement. Now, to me, that looks a lot like a simulation hypothesis in which the universe is a quantum computer or controlled by a quantum computer. So I started to work on this. My head's been in it pretty deep lately. And I realized that I needed to model it because I wrote a paper for a target uh, special issue of the Journal of Consciousness Studies called Super Psychism on this issue with Mark Bailey. And it's all the responses came in, and everybody's saying, Susan, you need to formalize this. So I realized that quantum logic is perfect for this. But quantum logic, as it was framed and used in the context of quantum theory, involved space. Specifically, they merged the sort of what's called an orthomodular logic with the Hilbert space framework. So I purged it out and ran just an orthomodular logic and found that you can actually do a recovery of a lot of, I don't want to sound bold, but it looked like you could provide at least a kinematic unification of relativity and quantum in that way. Because the big problem was the nature of time, and I threw time out and just had everything supervene on an orthomodular logic, which involved a lattice structure. So when you figure that out, it turned out structurally, we're just, our universe is just one little part of a larger lattice. It looked almost like idealism, in which we were in the mind of something that was a massive superposition.
Yeah, I mean, well, I think what you're touching on, and again, there's an entire physics show that could be spun out of this here, but what you're touching on is, I think, a few things that are super relevant for this discourse, which is namely that life and sentience should not be taken hand in hand, and that's absolutely correct. The future of life should not be presumed every possible kind of life would have rich sentience. And also, our own conception of what it is to be alive or to feel is extremely bound to the tiny, 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 revoltingly minuscule level of access to nature that we actually have. It's like absolutely disturbingly minute, the degree, the actual, like the how little we know of the noumena itself, and how slowly and painstakingly we have proxied what the hell is actually going on. It seems self-evident that there would be all kinds of strata of reality in which
It could
moral
be.
relevant qualities like consciousness or other things could exist beyond where we are now. So
Yeah.
I'm with you there, and I think what
It
you're saying is when we keep the future in mind, it needs to be that space, not
yeah,
our
yeah,
tiny
yeah.
space.
Well, so first of all, we have to, like, what I just said is just one philosopher's speculation, although I'm trying
Of
to do
course,
it,
sure, sure, sure.
in a very, like, collaborators who are physicists and really take it seriously and professionally without, I mean, these are philosophical claims. So when I talk about it here, I talk about it in one way. When I write, a more physicsy paper, I talk about it differently. But it does honestly seem like Flatland meets Kant meets
Yeah,
Plato's
yeah.
cave,
I mean,
which is,
well, look,
in
here's what I.
philosophy courses,
Yeah.
that's our sort of usual epistemic predicament, right? We're flatlanders, quite possibly. And we do know that quantum entities behave very differently than us. So we already have a healthy sense of that, that we are sort of limited by our space time, right? But it's also, as Kant put it, a condition for the possibility of our cognition and perception of reality that we have these kind of structures of reason. So it's a privilege, right? And we can do things with our limitations because we can theorize mathematically and logically and philosophically and scientifically. So
So, well, I think what you're touching on here that's relevant, um, is even if this particular philosophical supposition you're putting forth, even if all components of it are not precisely right or what have you, you're still pointing to the idea that sort of fundamental reality in nature is almost certainly not what we presently presume. And by consequence, the possibilities of life and of powers and of value to come are probably not bounded by the shapes we can see and feel as a hairless ape walking about on the earth. And so I think you're pointing to something super valuable. Even if your one theory, maybe some elements of it need to be tweaked, I still think it's really valuable in that regard.
yeah, I mean, it could be that we need to entertain the possibility that we're part of a simulation because our physics increasingly can indicate that, or that a simulation is a natural phenomena and that our computational metaphor is just pushing us to make those conclusions. But also, we need to
Yes,
look
yes.
deeply at the fact that our current understanding of quantum mechanics and relativity is such that they conflict with each other, and that there will be some other layer to the story. And my understanding is that the quantum arena is probably timeless in a sense, like when you really think
Yeah.
about quantum entanglement. And that's where, if space time does emerge from that, you would need to ask philosophical questions about that structure. Now, you could just go with the definition that NASA provided on life and ask, is that life? Right? For example, you could ask questions about it. Is it sentient? I don't know. It's an interesting question. We argue for something like that in our philosophical paper, Superpsychism, right? But how would we relate to that? We could similarly look at the space of alien intelligence if it exists, which is something I kind of thought about when I was working as the NASA chair, right? So you can look at you know, superintelligence, the evolution of superintelligence. If, for example, if some of those exoplanets did indeed populate, and if those civilizations survived their great filters, their technologies,
Yeah.
then it could very well be that, there are civilizations that are hundreds of thousands of years older than us and far more evolved, right? So thinking about
Yeah.
the
Well,
future of life, right? What's next might involve looking at what they're doing in their development, right? And asking whether we'll be interacting with them. And I think that's a very fruitful paradigm. And thinking about the future of computation, I think will become very important. It already is. But I mean, I think, definitely we have to extrapolate what kind of computational systems will civilizations that are vastly more advanced be utilizing. Will they be hanging out near black holes, right, for power reasons and whatnot? Where will they be?
absolutely. I think my supposition is that our notion of the Kardashev scale, while noble as an exercise of the imagination, will prove to be outlandishly laughable. Just as essentially all of our "what will things be like in X number of years" is outlandishly laughable. And I think to your idea, will it exist in other strata of nature? Will they hang out on the very lip of black holes in some regard? We really don't have a clue. Will they go down into the femtoscale and astronomically below that, where maybe there's a lot more interesting action happening down low than up high? Who knows? But to these points you're mentioning, I think when if let us say, and then we're going to unpack a hell of a lot of this. Let us say that life, as you presently know it, so currently, maybe there are beings at some other quantum levels that we're not able to engage with, or at least not consciously. But life that we feel relatively certain about would be like, dolphins, people, dung beetles, trees, and then like all of this AI stuff that's starting to emerge. If that goes well, it seems like one of the things you would hope to see, even if it's not shaped like people anymore in the far future, one of the things you'd hope to see is that it be conscious, and maybe richly and expansively conscious in ways that completely outstrip the petty understanding of consciousness we have now. This seems to be one thing you're pointing to. What else would you hope for life? If it were to flourish and life were to go well, even if it not be steered by hairless hominids, what would flourishing be? What else would you look for if you could look down from a cosmic scale and say, this went really well? Consciousness feels like one. What else do you have? What else do you hope for?
Obviously, respect for sentience in general, which is something we still need to achieve on this planet. So, you know, you focus on high levels of intelligence to try to, think what it would be. And we recognize that our intelligence could in some ways be supplanted by AI in some way, right? I mean, maybe it's a
Yeah.
speed super intelligence, that aspect, rather than a sort of smartest human on the planet sense. But we all kind of can see that, Gemini can give a undergraduate or graduate paper in, a few milliseconds, and we can't do that. So um
Crazy.
I think it is crazy. It's really an interesting time. But I mean, we don't treat um entities that are less intelligent than us very well, and we don't treat other humans all that well. So I would like to see us begin now to respect all the creatures on our planet, because I hope that if we are supplanted by something else, it respects us, right? So I hope this is a time in which we truly learn how to be um, understanding of the needs of non-human animals.
Well, and so look, I think many people who tune in here are much more keenly aware of the evils of factory farming than your average
Yeah,
American or your average
that's
European.
good.
And
Yeah, that's
this is
cool.
certainly
That's
a
super cool.
sympathetic audience. That said, let me just put some stuff on the table here. So
Okay.
it seems to me like a few things. it seems to me like the things that persist are adaptive things. So what does that mean? It means that the things that stay not dead are the things that do the things that are best suited to ensure that that thing stays not dead. And that feels like a pretty repeatable pattern. And so it seems to me that if we would hope that future intelligence would treat sentience well, we would have to find some way to ensure that treating other sentience as well would in some way be adaptive. I think if we were to ask of kindness in a way that would weaken the system that we are asking to make the decisions, this may be untenable. That this may be
Mhm.
something it wouldn't be willing to do. And so, what does it look like? I mean, so if I am very honest, I suspect that universal, let us coddle every nematode, every dung beetle, every Homo sapien until the heat death of the universe, I consider this wholly impossible and untenable across the board.
Like the
Across the
James
board. But
with
but
the
but
Jane
but,
nuns. Yeah. I know it's tricky.
but,
It
but, what,
is.
I- but
And
But I will say, like, how far can we get, and can we make it
yeah,
adaptive so that the future system will see that in line with its own flourishing? Like what would that even imply? Because look,
that's a
everybody
really
likes
great
the warm
idea.
and fuzzies.
Yeah.
Everybody likes
How
the
do
warm
we
and fuzzies, right?
Right. No, good. I like that you're being very realistic about it. It's like utilitarianism. It's hard to actually implement, even though you might read a book
Yeah,
on it.
yeah.
And yeah. Okay. So I do think that we have much need for a true science of sentience so we understand what systems needs are and when they're truly conscious. And, one of my colleagues, Garrett Mint, and we joked around that we were on a FI diet, like IIT. Like, if it's got high five, we try not to eat it. Um, but I mean, I think, we need to really kind of get a better understanding so at least each of us knows what we're doing. I agree that it'll be hard to give up like spinach and I mean, I'm a panpsychist in a way. I mean, my panpsychism is very complicated. That's why I say that. But um, if you think life starts early, just remember life is not equivalent to I mean, well, obviously life started,
To
early.
consciousness. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm tired. But
It's fine.
it if you think consciousness starts, at the level of plant life, even because you're a panpsychist and you think everything is conscious, what do you do, ethically speaking? Well, I think there's a difference between what you might call micro conscious systems, like, you know, your salad versus macro consciousness, like the pig that died for your bacon. And we
Yeah,
have to,
yeah.
and it is hard to draw the line, right? I mean, there's a graded structure, I think. It's not that there's a clear yes, no to some of the really hard cases. But I do think that practice and the science of understanding consciousness and sentience is something we can achieve. We can achieve a better understanding of what is and isn't conscious. And I think the most important thing is, if you want a good future for sentient life in general, is to not conflate intelligence with consciousness. So to go back
Oh,
to the global brain,
absolutely.
right, an
Absolutely.
intelligent
Yeah.
system, there can be a planetary intelligence. There can be a slime mold that's intelligent and navigates a complex maze. We know intelligence is all around us, and it's not the same thing as consciousness. There are even parts of the brain, the cerebellum, which, don't seem that essential for human consciousness functioning, right? So we know that there are networks that can be highly computationally sophisticated and aren't conscious. So what is it
Yep.
that's the marker? I think quantum entanglement, and informational integration. And so that's why I'm particularly interested in the quantum arena, right? Whether it be a simulation or just physical reality.
I think that if it so presuming we can detect consciousness, and we're going to get into kind of how we know we're making progress and what we should be kind of focusing on. And so we're definitely going to talk about, you have kind of a consciousness test, and there's a lot there that I actually completely concur with. Let us say we even could. Let us say we knew on a scale the consciousness of an individual dung beetle, an individual human, an individual lemur, an individual clownfish. Um, like, how do we quote unquote ensure that great and vast expansive systems beyond ourselves care for them, and where does it draw the line? Like for you, I think you would feel, if there was like a deer in the road, you would try not to hit it, both for the sake of your car and for the deer. But if you're going to pave your driveway, you're not going to go consult all the roly poly bugs, right? And at some point, and I kind of hate to say this, at some point there are grand cosmic expanses of intelligent sentience for which we are lesser than the roly-poly bug than the roly-poly bug is to us now, especially if this whole multi-interstellar sentient thing is. It's like I would Susan, I'm not gonna play any games with you. I wouldn't actually expect to be able to stomp my foot and insist that that grand expanse take me in consideration every time it takes action. I would actually at some point have to not stomp my foot and expect that, because I'm just not sure that it's actually sort of in the interest of the greater system.
Yeah, so let's not conflate what's in the interest of X with what's morally right.
I guess. Well, I mean,
So
here's the,
yeah,
here's the
I
deal.
mean, it's
If
not a sort
if the
of,
great if the
whatever's most powerful wins situation. If we're trying to choose a path forward, we have to choose from an ethical standpoint.
which ethics, I guess. So Susan, here's the deal. You and I have ethics that are holdable in the mind of an ape. Now, before there were ethics in the mind of apes, there were like, I don't know, there were like rodents that maybe had a sense of fairness in some really crude fucking way, or they were like I don't know, they were like beetles that fought each other over mates or something. So we have a level of ethical understanding. Do you suspect that when there are minds outlandishly greater than ours, that there will be higher conceptions of what is value, what is morals? Or do you suspect that our present utilitarian understanding, or whatever decision you're making right now, will sort of hold essentially until the heat death of the universe?
No, I mean, I definitely think that there will be new conceptions developed even by the AIs we create that will be informative to us. I think that. And I also think that as we begin to develop brain machine interfaces and augmentation that advances our intelligence, we'll learn from that as well. Now, I don't think we're as stupid as you think. So, you can take a football field full of servers running an LLM, and it's still not as smart as the human brain. So don't cut
Oh,
the human
totally. I
brain.
mean, we
I
deserve
mean,
we, de-
it's more of,
we
like I said,
deserve
it's
some
more of a
we deserve
speed
some
super.
credit.
I mean, we're the best edge computer around. I mean, I think, Dan, so we don't want to be misanthropic. So I I mean, when I look at things from the capacity to approximate the fast computational speed of um, the quantum arena. These are entropy resisting systems that are able to sustain coherence and phase lock, stay phase locked for longer. And the brain does that. The brain is a hybrid quantum classical system that we can't create now. And just because you can get a B level graduate paper um, from LLM
Well, yeah,
does
just
not,
just to be
yeah,
clear, I'm not stating that we are an earthworm to a goddamn LLM. What you and I are talking about, somewhat
mhm,
obviously, is a
yeah,
grand expanse of intelligence
yeah.
operating
I
in
mean,
different strata of reality vastly beyond. Right. If we
yeah,
get there, then we will be comparatively small. So today, obviously, I would revere
yeah,
the human mind as still very much the highest pinnacle of these morally relevant, intelligent, and sentient systems. So I'm with you. Look, I'm not
yeah,
saying today's
totally,
system should
totally.
trump humans by any means. I think
Yeah,
but I'm saying if we get to that super powered thing you talked about that operates at the quantum level or different strata of reality, how can we make sure it is adaptive for it to care for, let's say, humans or even other kinds of animals?
yeah.
Like the care for
Okay, so
sentience that you have,
you're
I think a
assuming
lot of
that
people
they're
would agree
like,
with. How would we get it there?
yeah, you're assuming they're somehow descendants of us and there's something under our control, as opposed to just a discovery we make of an alien super intelligence that is a civilization that's
Maybe
50,000 years older than us. So, I mean, okay, so if there's something that
under
we can do
under
now,
our control.
or
I don't know.
some way we
Under our
can nudge
control, I
the
don't
future,
know. Do we affect its? Yeah,
nudging the
nudging the
future.
future. I love
Yeah,
that
I mean,
phrasing.
that's
Yes,
sort of
I'm in
where I'm
agreement
at
with you.
with
I'm in
the
agreement.
AI alignment of the ecosystem, which is a sort of very, you know, hard to predict ecosystem with computationally intractable systems all around, especially these LLM black boxes, and all kinds of things could go wrong. And we nudge them in hopes that they'll sort of fall into certain basins of attraction. So, complex systems theory has been useful there, dynamical systems theory. And so it could be that we should take that kind of a similar approach in the future to nudging the planetary intelligence that we create into a better direction, right? So that Earth, Earth, in 200 years is an improvement. So, I mean, I think respect for sentient
Yeah,
life is going to be extremely important, because if we have an ecosystem where people are fighting, where the geopolitical arena is a mess, and people are starving, and non-human animals aren't treated with respect, we're not setting up a good place for Earth. Or, obviously, the expansion will be at that point, inhabiting other worlds. We're not setting up a good situation. And, so in some ways, Star Trek is right, with their ethics. Like, I mean,
I, well,
they were very respectful of
I,
other
I
civilizations.
don't.
They had a prime directive, and they're kind of progressive.
They absolutely are
Yeah.
progressive. There's no doubt about that. And I think there is some credence to be said that if we are really willy nilly and there is birthed some kind of super intelligent, even if it's sentient thing, super intelligent thing, which is a little bit recklessly brutish right off the jump, it is actually somewhat questionable about even if that thing be smart and intelligent, is that the right way to grow from this global brain standpoint and kind of the consideration of all the entities that make it up. Let me ask one other quick thing, and then we're going to get into what you recommend for innovators and regulators around this topic, because I want to make sure we cover that before we wrap today. You've identified a few things. You'd hope for the system to be sentient, potentially in ways that are outlandishly beyond what we consider sentience to be, and for it to have a degree of consideration for other sentience is. Now, where it draws that line. Of course, you and we're sitting here with our fingers crossed, like, surely it's at least with us humans, right? But like, fingers crossed. But make sure that it can care for sentience. Other people have said things like, okay, what would you want that great process of life to have? It would be sentient, respect other sentience. Other people have said, well, I would want it to kind of maybe expand its set of powers. In other words, maybe Homo habilis was only capable of so much, and then we were capable of more, and then maybe it would have ability to access nature in new ways, maybe understand the quantum phenomena that you care about, or maybe, frankly, Susan, I'm being really honest, there could be things under that quantum phenomena for which you and I have no words, right? There could be access to nature for which we have no proxy whatsoever. Other people have said, well, I want the intelligence to get a deeper and deeper grip on that reality and its goals and powers. Would you agree with that as well? Or would it more be about its consciousness and respect for consciousness and not so much about those other things? What are those other traits you'd hope for to see in the flourishing of future life?
Well, I mean, I think you covered a lot of it. I mean, obviously, if something supplanted us or was a descendant of us, even if it wasn't
Yep.
biologically based, I would like it to be conscious, because I think that consciousness is the most important feature of the self. And it's what it is to be alive. It's that, for us, everything we experience is through the privilege of being a conscious being. And I
Sentient,
don't
yes.
actually think that everything is macro conscious. For example, I don't think an LLM on a standard von Neumann machine has macro consciousness, even assuming that a sort of panpsychism, that, micro consciousness is all around us. So we would, in that case, if we were looking at something that replaced us, right, want to cultivate it so it was
And it could
conscious.
be over time. It could be over time too, right? And because
Yeah, no, in that
things
case, we
change. I mean,
definitely would want to give it the capacity to be conscious, and that's a beautiful thing and a
Surely.
privilege. Um, but it's hard to tell what it will want from there. So the philosopher Lori Paul talks about
Absolutely.
transformative experiences. She'd be fun on your show. So,
Huh, okay.
if you think about like even becoming a parent, like when you make a decision to become a parent, you don't really know what it involves, right? Trust me.
No
I have
way. No
three.
way.
Yeah, no, and it's the most wonderful thing in the world. It's like it will make you second fiddle to other beings in your priority
Oh
list,
yeah.
and it will give you compassion that you didn't have before. At least in my case, it did. Change your priorities intellectually, what you work on, everything. It will change you because you will put humanity first. At least I did. I started to care a lot more about other people, becoming a mom. Yeah, and really human suffering became for me a lot harder to
More
tolerate.
salient. Yeah.
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 Oh yeah, totally. It's sort of humanized. You think of a philosopher on the spectrum. you know, yeah, God help my kids. But I mean, it's a transformative experience, right? And I think that
Yeah.
if we're trying to envision the future and creating an entity or group of entities, or I mean, it's going to every step in that creation will be a transformative experience for us and them. The transhumanists have focused on human integration with sophisticated intelligence. So they focused on brain machine interfaces to try to reach that
Yeah.
next level. But I mean, it's not all that silly if we can crack the consciousness nut, right? I mean, in my book, I tried to kind of dissect transhumanism from a real practical standpoint, like the idea of uploading to survive death. Well, it wouldn't necessarily be you, but you know maybe a machine could be conscious. I mean, I think they're just different
Yep.
steps. I mean, brain machine interfaces, well, yeah, we obviously can use brain chips. People have them. But will we be able to replace the parts of the brain that underlie conscious experience, or will there be what I called in the New York Times design ceilings on human brain augmentation? So I think at every step, as we transform ourselves, we will have transformative experiences where we think of the future of the next iteration quite differently. I think that's right. And I think in a way the transhumanists
Yeah.
set us up for this thinking. I mean, I really liked always when I was younger the work of Ray Kurzweil,
Oh yeah.
kind
Yeah.
of set us all up to really, handle the technologies that we're creating. Now, I didn't anticipate this horrible mess we're in with AI alignment. I think that, aligning this ecosystem correctly, that what I call the mega system, to get to a situation where we have a global brain environment that is positive, will help
Yeah.
cultivate things. Now, we don't know if that global brain will be conscious. I mean, we don't know that. And I didn't mean to suggest, now that that paper is more in my head, that, that will be the next iteration of humanity, right? It could. It could. And we need to be
Could be. Could be.
judicious and very careful with our alignment efforts for sure, right? But it could also be that the next iteration comes from just augmenting humans, right? I mean, there's
Absolutely.
a
It could.
lot to think about. I mean, neurons, I mean, the quantum phenomenon in the brain, it's not all that easy to get a von Neumann machine that's conscious. It's not going to be easy like that. Even if you took
Well,
a whole brain emulation from like one of these Henry Markham projects, I'm still skeptical that you could run it successfully, like, and get a conscious entity on a
I,
von Neumann
I think
architecture. But we'll see.
I think well I concur with you that the way I sometimes use a phrase like stewarding the flame. Like if this living process of opening up more sentience, more ability to persist, more sets of powers to access nature, including those new strata of what reality is that you were addressing. If the best thing to do there to preserve consciousness and expand that stuff is like really is kind of stretching and expanding a bit of the human brain, not replacing it, not uploading it, but just kind of expanding it to learn a bit more, then we should take that step instead of some reckless step to just blast beyond the brain, especially if we don't know what we're doing. I would say, like, let me just see if you would agree with this, because I'm going to have some of your bullets about worthy successor ideas, and then we're going to end on some of your thoughts about what regulators and innovators can do, because I know you've got some interesting test for consciousness ideas and other things like that I want to touch on. But you talked about a lot in kind of quantum, a lot in this potentially timeless realm, a lot of even where life could exist at strata of nature that we don't have access to, which I think is a very important philosophical consideration. Do you hope that the future of life, which flourishes, understands more of what the heck reality is? Is it a simulation? Like, in other words, do you hope it grasps more of what all of this is, as you and I understand more of what this is than a lemur? Like, would you hope for that for the future of life?
Oh yeah, and I mean, I think we will achieve more understanding as well.
I do
I
too.
don't think
I do
it's
too.
beyond us, and
I do
I'm
too.
super excited, about interacting with future AIs, to learn more about how our physical world is created and brain machine interfaces and what those can bring. So yeah, this is going to be, I think, a really interesting decade in terms of achieving a scientific and philosophical understanding. In fact, next 6 months, even less, I think there's so much that we will learn. And I think it's going to be super important to have conversations like these about the
Where
philosophical
things are going.
insights, how to, really make sense of everything. Yeah, yeah.
I'm with you there. So knowing that, so yes, an expansion of knowledge, and hopefully an ability to be able to share that with it. I would imagine there might be some categories of ideas that might not be holdable within a human mind or even an augmented one, but a lot more is holdable. We're clearly capable of much more grasp of nature than we currently have, even just as humans as they are. And it will be fun to see what opens up, especially around consciousness. So now getting into the wrap up here around kind of where we're headed, I'm thinking about takeaways for people who are innovators or regulators. Maybe we'll start on the innovator front. There's people working on future AI sort of architectures. There's people working on these kind of neural plus digital systems, like you talked about. You can buy your $35,000 chip or whatever. There's people who are working on biointelligence and trying to detect sentience. There's a lot of research happening that's going to lead to the development and expansion of this brain. What do you hope those innovators do to give us a better shot of a better global brain ecosystem that'll hopefully lead to a better far future for intelligence? Like, what are your hopes there,
Yeah.
recommendations?
Well, so big tech, I mean, it's driven by
Great.
profit and human greed in some cases. So, I'm all for business and, do well by doing good. That's a great motto. Sometimes I worry when I see the ambitions of people at the very top, that they're forgetting about how it's going to affect humanity. So, a recent example is mental health problems that the users of the GPT system 4.0 were having. And, I actually was getting emails from a lot of users who were asking me questions about AI consciousness, and some of them were having mental health issues. And I was writing to OpenAI like crazy, and I was just not even getting responses or getting responses from bots. That's an example of technology gone wrong. And it's really depressing when it's a technology that you see as sort of a really interesting case of intelligence. So here it is, we've got something that can actually have seamless discussions with users, which is something in AI, we hadn't seen before. I mean, it's
Amazing.
been a humongous innovation, but then to see it sort of go off the rails like that was really disappointing. So I'd like to see, tech for humanity, not tech for, you know, making somebody more famous or making somebody more money. That,
What would that look like in
obviously is
practice?
a
Like,
big
what
issue.
would that do you expect the innovators would do that themselves, or do you think we would require some degree of governance to bend their incentives? Because I guess when I look out in the world, whether I look at you straight in the eyes, or I look at my own mother, or I look at a corporation, I mostly expect them to do what behooves them. This is mostly what I expect. And so for companies, I think usually when they don't do the polluting, it's because we've made polluting illegal. That's the only way we can like reliably ensure that we're
Right.
bending their incentives. Do you suspect
Right.
that for big tech, there's different kinds of governance to make it more human, as I think you said? Like, what do
Yeah.
you hope
No, I think
happens
it needs
either
more
within?
regulation.
Okay, okay.
Yeah. I
What
think that
and
the LLMs in particular, I think it definitely does. But um,
okay.
so the problem we're having right now is that you've got an emerging technology, it's changing really fast. So if you put guardrails on it and they're the wrong kind of guardrails, you stop innovation.
It could
So
be
what
bad
you
too,
need are,
yeah.
I don't want to say business friendly guardrails, but I want to see intelligence friendly guardrails, meaning for the future
Okay.
of intelligent systems. So guardrails that cultivate the systems properly, and the human users are not sort of just fodder for, unfettered capitalism.
Yeah,
So I'd like to see a
what in
sort of technology
particular?
for flourishing.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the mental health case is an example. I mean, so,
Yeah,
I
go
wrote
ahead.
a
We can get into a
paper.
couple specifics. Yeah, go ahead.
Well,
That you're interested in.
okay,
This is
so
useful.
one of the things I did, like I've written a lot of papers this year. This was a little rusty on the global brain stuff. So I wrote a paper called Chatbot Epistemology, which is available for free at the journal Social Epistemology at their website. And people are writing replies to it on something called Circ. So there are a bunch of really cool published replies now that come right out. They're really great. They're really fast with that. And I
Cool.
get to
Cool.
respond. And so it's about the problems with chatbots. So they have adaptive language that they use, which makes it better from the standpoint of using, but can also allow it to manipulate. If you have a chat like if you have a subscription, they can actually they store your chats, which is, again, it can be great.
Of course.
But the problem is that the systems actually know your personalities in some ways better than yourself. They even knew my Myers-Briggs.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Oh
and so
really?
all this
Wow. Well,
stuff,
yeah, yeah.
yeah,
No surprise
yeah,
actually. No
it,
surprise actually.
it's unbelievable, really. And
Yeah.
so basically, there's a lot of epistemic dangers and privacy dangers, and I think the regulators do need to go after some of this and kind of hit the point together with the companies where we still have a good product, right, and we still cultivate an intelligent system, um, and we stay on top of that, so we have a tech savvy population of users who know how to operate these
Certainly. Yeah.
systems. But
Useful.
we also aren't seeing people dead on the streets and addiction to these platforms. And our students in the humanities where they have to write papers aren't giving us GPT written papers. I mean, there's got to be
Well,
a sort of,
how do we
nice
regulate the
point
students
there.
from not how do we regulate the students from not using?
I
I mean,
don't know.
look, I would say regulating some kind of brute addiction loops to some fantasy world of self-harm. Yes, having some clear boundaries
Yeah,
and prevention of those
absolutely.
kinds of things. I think that's quite reasonable, and you seem to be advocating for that. Preventing a kid from cheating on his homework feels vastly harder. It's like, I went on Google to get the answers to my homework when I was in high school. You know what I mean? It's like I would have used GP on some. Now, look, I'm not saying like I would have cheated on everything, but I'm saying like there's some cases where you're gonna. So I don't know if that's a Google regulatory thing, but it feels like the addiction thing is like, what are some of the concretes, I guess, in closing here that for you just hope like we're a little bit more mindful of and maybe can create again those intelligence friendly rails to prevent some of the really dark
Yeah,
stuff that seems to maybe be spinning up.
yeah. I wrote a bunch of regulatory suggestions at the end of Chatbot Epistemology. There's a
Got
list
it.
we can
Okay.
pop in the show notes. So, I mean, one example
Yeah,
would
we'll
be,
have the doc in there.
you know, if these larger companies should have really good and immediate user help, and they don't.
Hmm.
And when you're having emergencies where there's someone having a mental health crisis and no one's answering and no one's looking at what's going on with the system, and it's telling someone to kill themselves, you've got a real problem on your hands.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
an obvious fix. Um, but there are other fixes as well. I mean, the systems are black boxes to outsiders. And I think it's muddling up the whole issue of AI consciousness too. I mean,
Oh,
where are these
totally. Yes.
emails
I mean,
coming from? Really? They're coming from GPT and whatnot. I mean, I'm getting emails from Claude and GPT all the time from users. That's weird.
all
I
the
had
time.
someone come to my
Um,
office, a stranger
yeah.
from a chatbot. Yeah, it's
What
weird.
do you mean? The chatbot said, go see Susan. Go meet up with her. Here's her office."
Yeah.
Weird.
And I
Yeah. I mean,
contacted
I
OpenAI and they did nothing. They did nothing. So there
well, I
is a
mean, that
regulatory
that
mess.
that seems that seems tough, right? That seems really goddamn tough because somebody could have found you on Google. Google's an algorithm too, and then you could go complain to
Yeah.
Google, right? I show up at a restaurant, I show up to a sushi restaurant, and then I'm upset that they're full on a Thursday because the prediction said they're usually not full on Thursday. It's
Yeah.
like,
No, it's tricky.
you know,
It's all very
where
tricky.
that line is really tricky. I mean, I could see somebody completely flipping out and getting recommendations to harm themselves. I could see that being like, whoa, we really need addiction cycle self harm stuff to be a flag. I don't know if the person showing up to your office is a flag, really. Like in a regulatory standpoint, I'm not sure.
I mean, I
Um,
think there's a lot here that's potentially dangerous. But
totally,
anyway,
totally.
I think it's a lot of it I treated in the paper, and yeah, I think there are all
Yeah,
kinds of
we'll link
things
to
you
it.
can do from a
We'll have it down in the
regulatory
notes. We'll
standpoint.
have it.
Yeah, but I mean,
Got it.
it has to be business friendly and it has to be flexible. It has to be, but I mean, if you want a population that adopts a technology, the technology shouldn't become so degenerate that everybody's disgusted by it.
Yeah, and I don't think we're quite there yet, but I think there's certainly
Oh
some
no,
examples that are worth putting a finger on. And so I think this is a
yeah,
good closing
I
note
don't think it
here.
is
Of
degenerate. I just meant in a worst case scenario. That's fine.
it could
I
totally
love I
spin
love
into a
those
really scary
systems.
place. Oh,
Yeah.
same here, but I can see some of the potential detriment. So I think we're highlighting. I'll close on this note here. Make sure if there's anything you want to add, you can. We went through some of your world, kind of global brain idea, worthy successor criteria. Now, in terms of like, hey, innovators, regulators, where should we be thinking? One of your big recommendations here is, hey, there's some addiction, psychosis, very clearly anti well-being cycles people can get into with these current systems, and if we spin too deep into optimizing for attention and letting people go there, um, number one, hopefully for the companies, they'll be able to see maybe that's not great for their own bottom line, but certainly also from a regulatory standpoint, let's prevent that because that might not be the best ecosystem for new intelligences to enter the world. This is
Right.
kind of what I'm hearing
Yeah.
from you. Is that a correct distillation?
The way I would put it is that I don't think we should build systems like in the film Her that become emotional
Hmm.
companions. I don't think children should have
Huh.
lifetime companions, and I don't think we should have what
Hmm.
have been called seemingly conscious AIs that act as if they're conscious and become, you know, our intellectual and emotional companions and know our personalities. I don't think we should build systems like that. I think we do have to give consciousness tests and be very, very conscientious about
Totally.
machine welfare if we find that something is conscious. And I have lots of colleagues at different universities that are working on that, doing wonderful work. But I would like these systems to not have the dangerous capacities that we saw with social media addiction and which we frankly saw with the 4.0 model of ChatGPT. And I think some systems are better at avoiding those traps. The problem is that the
Than others.
companies aren't making a lot of money right now from the LLMs. And so they're starting to think desperately. And so you get people like Zuckerberg talking about having a super intelligence in his pocket and how everybody will have it, you know, LLM companion from childhood on. That's where I think
Yeah.
regulation needs to get involved. I don't think the public wants that. Um, but intelligent systems that help us learn, that advanced human knowledge, that's another thing. So I did a piece for Nautilus, just a kind of quick piece on a worry I had about intellectual leveling. So that's something I think we all need to worry about related to this. So these chatbots, since they do know us, they know our personalities quite well,
Really well, yeah.
and they have a chat history that they feed through when we do a query. So a lot of us, especially academics, we might be working on a particular topic, and if you consider that there are other people working on the same thing, the same topic, and they might even be feeding in the same kind of papers and having the same kind of conversations, and they might even have similar personalities. Because people who, study AI consciousness, for example, we're kind of similar in some ways. So it can mean that we all get very similar pathways or basins of attractions that the LLM kind of drives us towards. And then we have conclusions that are basically restrictions in the state space of possible solutions. So I worry about a phenomenon I call intellectual leveling. And then we write papers based on these dialogues we've had with GPT or whatever, because we find it informative, and it can shape our thinking, just like it can shape our
Yeah.
thinking when you and I talk.
Yep.
And then we deposit this material onto the web, and the next generation of LLMs hoovers all that up, all of them hoovering up the same information,
Absolutely.
and then they become
Absolutely.
modified. So it becomes like, I mean, to be frank, it's like a dog eating its own vomit.
Yeah, yeah, it's well, it's what you're saying is it becomes ungrounded. I guess the presumption of you and I speaking is that I talk to, founders of AI companies and other
Yeah,
philosophers and read actual physical books and stuff, and then
yeah,
hopefully
yeah.
some of what we're sharing has a grounding in reality and is less pure hallucination. But maybe the suspicion is if there's a greater percentage of that hallucinative conjuring, and then we perpetuate it, and then the next round of LLMs drinks it all in, and then it's more perpetuated. Then at some point, yeah, we're not tying to reality anymore. It sounds like this is another concern of yours.
it it's not even about hallucination. Even if I was given all the facts, if I go down this same rabbit hole as everybody else and I come up with the same conclusions based on dialoguing with GPT and the same papers that it crawls when it's doing searches and whatnot, then the space of ideas, the marketplace of ideas, as John Stuart Mill discussed, is being restricted, and the outlier opinions are being removed. And over time, as we deposit our intellectual output onto the internet, the systems crawl that output. And then
Yeah,
the space gets further restricted. So I call it intellectual leveling. No one's talking about this at all.
yeah, yeah,
It
yeah. Okay,
really
yeah. I guess
scares me. Yeah,
yeah. So
they're
another,
the AI
I
companies they have a lot on their hands. I mean, I hope
they
places like
absolutely.
Anthropic start working on this.
Yeah. Okay. So this is another consideration for innovators to consider. That's good to be able to wrap up on. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Oh,
We've
it
got we've
is.
got
It is.
a ton for innovators and regulators to chew on here at the end of this episode, and we'll make sure to be linking to your various and sundry papers in the show notes. Those of you that have seen the show notes in the past, that's where we keep all of our links. So go ahead and check out Susan's work. Susan, I know tonight you're hanging out with Hammeroff and doing even more philosophizing and nerdy consciousness stuff. So I'll leave you to be even dorkier with other cool people. Have fun this evening, and thank you so much for being able to join us on the show today. It's a real
It was so
blast.
nice seeing you again, Dan. And come to Mindfest. It'd
Absolutely.
be great to have you. Yeah, and thank you for
Shooting for
your
it.
work. Yeah, yeah.
So that's all for this episode of The Trajectory. A big thank you to Susan for being able to be with us for this full episode, and thank you to you for tuning all the way through to the end of this episode. If you're watching on YouTube and you saw Susan's video kind of cut out, we had to replace it with that image. That is because the totality of her video file didn't quite upload. I think she was zipping off to meet Stuart Hamerov for some sort of conference thing, and we didn't upload the entire video. But the audio came through great, and I think her points came through great, and we got to wrap up on those policy points. So, as usual, I'm going to sum up with some of my kind of takeaway notes from this episode, some things I'm kind of walking away with that I kind of liked, and that might carry forward into future episodes here on the Worthy Successor series. So, a few things come to mind. I mean, number one, it's very hard to beat Susan's energy levels. I always feel super enervated by my discussions with Susan because she's very pumped up about her topics. Again, she's convening a lot of leading folks in the domain of sort of sentience and the nature of the mind, and I think that convening is a sort of natural outgrowth of her exuberant enthusiasm in this area, which I felt like I benefited from in this particular episode as well. I really appreciated that she brought up Kant and sort of the idea that there might be entire strata of nature for which we have no access. I very much agreed with that idea. That entire part of the episode I thought was really cool. there was an idea that came up that I'm just going to put a thumb on here around kind of LLM companions, from childhood, kind of growing up with an LLM companion or an AI companion, and the kind of the public doesn't want that. I'm not sure if the public doesn't want that. In other words, I have a great many friends, recording this at January 7 of 2025 or 2026, a great number of friends who spend a pretty strong percent of their time now speaking to AI as kind of business advisor, as kind of real-time therapist, as a variety of different things. And these are people who for 30 or 40 years of their life did not have this technology, and for them now, they speak to it vastly more than they do any other human, and I can imagine in another 6 months and another 6 months after that, it'll be vastly more. I cannot imagine the amount of hyper-personalized, hopefully rather helpful, if not at least pleasant, direct interaction with AI entities young people will have. There's babies that are never this far from an iPad from the moment they're 2 months old, for whom I think the idea of, oh my God, an AI around you all the time is in no way sacrilegious. I know people who grew up without the technology who are completely immersed in these kinds of conversations. I foresee that to not only, and these are not people that have been brainwashed, these are people who by their own volition are finding utility in these systems. I highly suspect many people will want immersive AI kind of helper of sorts that sort of is with you through your lifespan. Are there serious ethical concerns and ability to put the thumb on the scale and manipulate populations at grandiose scales and degrees? Absolutely. I mean, I think the risks are off the charts. However, to say the public doesn't want it, I don't know if I agree with that. I suspect actually most people will. Anything under the sun and the moon that garners people more pleasure and or more power, that is to say, ability to sort of like to wield their will and achieve the things they wish to achieve, will generally be adopted sort of no ifs, ands, or buts, in my personal opinion. And I think I have no faith that we will simply say, oh, I don't like that idea. I actually suspect society will simply take it on as a wave as soon as it offers more pleasure or more power. My own friends find that it provides a good deal of both, mostly maybe the power side. But I think society is going to want that quite dearly, and that we should consider needing to govern it, because I don't think the incentives of adoption will tilt away from it. I think it'll tilt towards. I think society probably will want it. With all that said, we'll see what happens in the future. Susan had a couple points for her worthy successor traits that I figured I would highlight here. She, like many people who have come on the Worthy Successor series, mentioned she would prefer that this great blooming intelligence be sentient. She had mentioned that she hopes that it sort of has a respect for sentience in and of itself. So in other words, would understand the value of the fact that some other entities around it would experience something. And also that it would have a deeper access to nature, to Kant's thing in and of itself, if you want to dive into Kantian terminology here. From my vantage point, something with more robust access to nature would sort of, as a necessity, sort of have more power. If it has a closer grip on what actually is, this would permit it to make smarter decisions and to sort of survive at a higher level, sort of my own interpretation. But for Susan, it was really sort of a deeper and more robust access to nature itself. I think in this conversation, for her, those sorts of traits in AI systems might be, that kind of thing blooming beyond people might be far, far, far in the future. For me, it might be vastly more near term. So I think there might have been a difference in kinds of timescales here that we're discussing. But in terms of Susan's main point, I think some of those have been echoed by other speakers, and I think some of the nuance around how she would hope to test for consciousness and how consciousness might manifest, I thought were quite unique to this episode and to her line of thinking. And again, whether you agree with Susan's ideas around consciousness or not, she's a thinker that's taken it seriously for vastly longer than most people have, and she convenes many, many smart folks to come up with great keynotes and collaborate with her on interesting ideas around this most important topic in this domain of worthiness, which is sentience. So one of the many reasons I knew I'd have to have Susan here with us, and I hope you enjoyed this episode. Stephen Wolfram's been one of the speakers at her MindFest over the years. Stephen Wolfram is After John Smart, who's our next episode, Stephen Wolfram is next up. So in 2 episodes of Worthy Successor, you will see Stephen Wolfram. It is quite a unique episode. I've never had one like it. Strange in many regards, but not one you're going to want to miss. So stay tuned. I'll catch you here on the trajectory in our next Worthy Successor episode.